Hey guys! Tonight we're diving into the chaotic, unexpected, and sometimes shocking history of the medieval papacy, where holy power often veered off course into favoritism, corruption, and highly visible controversies. These weren't merely religious figures. Some acted like ambitious aristocrats, battlefield commanders, or even theatrical drama queens who just happened to don a bishop's hat. So, before settling in, feel free to give the video a thumbs up and hit subscribe if you truly like what I'm sharing. Drop a comment below about where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's always interesting to discover who's tuning in from different parts of the globe. Now lower the lights, perhaps switch on a fan for that gentle ambient noise, and let's settle into this exploration together. When folks picture the papacy, they typically envision a dignified figure in white robes gently waving from a balcony, maybe sharing blessings, peace, and a couple of strong words on ethics. What they don't imagine is a young aristocrat squandering church money on bets, or a pope with so many foes that he needed a moat around his residence. But that's the Middle Ages for you, where the papal seat wasn't simply a symbol of sanctity. It was the hottest contested power position in Europe, right behind whatever royal throne was being battled over in France at the moment. In principle, the Pope served as Christ's representative, the spiritual guide for all believers, a person devoted to devotion, modesty, and altruism. In reality, the papacy frequently operated like a prestigious political award handed around among eager clans, much like an ornate hot potato. One that included troops, territories, and sufficient wealth to launch a modest realm, or at least spark a scandal or two. The chair of St. Peter wasn't merely holy, it was tactical. The person occupying it could anoint emperors, banish monarchs, and declare which faction in a conflict supposedly had divine favor. That's immense responsibility for any individual. It's also a huge lure, particularly if that individual gained the role through payoffs, remote relatives, and a particularly eager bishop. Popes weren't always scholars of divinity or holy men. Many were offspring of nobility lacking battlefield skills, conveniently steered toward the clergy as a fallback profession. Consider this. You're not skilled with a blade, Benedict, but you excel in Latin. How about overseeing all of Western Christianity? Once in authority, certain popes governed like kings, launching conflicts, gathering levies, and in some instances, behaving like Renaissance libertines with superior attire. The boundaries between religious influence and political maneuvering grew fuzzier with each passing century. By the 10th and 11th centuries, papal selections featured enough scheming to make a Netflix series seem tame. This is the era we're entering, not one of serene contemplation, but of drive, deceit, and the rare courtroom proceeding against a dead body. To be frank, naming an 18-year-old as the ultimate leader of the Catholic Church wasn't likely the wisest choice. Yet in 955, Rome did precisely that when Octavian, offspring of an influential Roman noble, ascended as Pope John XII. A title he chose, probably to appear more ecclesiastical and less like a kid who still required assistance with his footwear. He wasn't selected for his devotion or profound religious wisdom. He was picked because his kin wielded enough sway in Rome to turn the Vatican into what resembled a family-operated enterprise. Once in the position, the youthful John handled the papacy not as a sacred duty, but as a kind of private entertainment venue with access to the wealth reserves. His actions soon built him a notoriety that was less spiritual leader of Christendom and more spoiled Roman elite with excessive authority. He supposedly bet in the Lateran Palace, overindulged in drink, raised toasts to ancient deities at banquets, and converted the papal home into a blend of leisure mansion and a poorly run inn. Observers charged him with making the latter a house of ill repute. He apparently appointed a deacon in a barn. He hosted extravagant feasts where the distinction between wrongdoing and holy rite became hazy, if it was there at all. One historian labeled him as living like a satyr, which in medieval polite terms roughly means, "This guy makes Caligula seem modest." Even worse, John had no reservations about blending governance with private grudges. He once ordered a man's eyes removed. Another individual's tongue was reportedly severed. Then he assembled an army, lost it, pleaded with the German Emperor Otto for aid, and betrayed him as soon as he looked away. It all concluded appropriately in disgrace. In 964, Pope John XII supposedly succumbed to a stroke while in bed with a wedded woman. Some claim he was divinely punished for his transgressions. Others suggest the woman's spouse might have delivered the blow. If Pope John XII's role involved thoroughly and frequently disgracing the Church, then he certainly excelled. His conduct wasn't merely dubious by ecclesiastical norms, it was dubious by Roman pub norms. And that's noteworthy. Let's begin with the betting. Medieval writers were appalled to learn that the Pope, the alleged stand-in for Christ, relished dice games so much that he supposedly engaged in them during official meetings. Nothing conveys "blessed are the humble" like hitting a perfect roll while accepting offerings. John was accused of calling upon pagan deities during bets, which from a religious perspective is somewhere between highly troublesome and grounds for Old Testament-style retribution. But John wasn't done. Accounts indicate he maintained a changing roster of lovers, some married, some nuns, and at least one who was probably just delivering provisions and departed with second thoughts and prayer beads. The Lateran Palace, formerly a hub of religious scholarship, turned into something akin to a Roman single-man's lair with colorful glass panes. Even his handling of the Church's most revered customs seemed like mockery. He was said to bestow blessings with his left hand, which in medieval iconography was essentially the holy version of a rude gesture. He traded church properties for benefits, appointed a deacon in a horse stall, and supposedly saluted Satan at a boozy banquet. To be honest, it's uncertain if this was a true doctrinal mistake or simply terrible social manners. The Roman elites were outraged. The German Emperor Otto was even more incensed, particularly after John pledged allegiance to him and then promptly schemed against him. In the end, Otto advanced on Rome and removed the young pope, appointing a successor who was at minimum not intoxicated. But John returned like a medieval melodrama antagonist, reclaiming the papal seat via a mix of bribes, intimidations, and classic disorder. If you figured one controversial pope was sufficient, reconsider. Enter Pope Benedict IX, a figure so divisive he didn't merely hold one papal tenure. He held three. Not from piety, not even by widespread support. No, Benedict resurfaced repeatedly like a troublesome property owner reclaiming the rental. He initially became pope in 1032 at around age 20, though estimates differ, which to clarify is still much too youthful to head a worldwide faith, especially when your pastimes involve debauchery, payoffs, and exercising church power like a youngster with a fire starter. Benedict's initial rule was rife with murmurs of vice so severe that historians started exhausting alternatives for shameful. One even noted that his actions were feasting on the sins of the flesh, which is medieval code for, "Please somebody halt this individual." Charges spanned from selling church offices and coercion to the delightful detail that he introduced wild beasts into the papal residence. Whether that was figurative or actual is ambiguous, which somehow worsens it. In time, even his supporters were aghast. In 1044, a rebellion compelled Benedict to leave. But he came back, naturally, because what's a minor uprising among allies? He retook the seat, and then, in a plot twist even Machiavelli might deem over the top, sold the papacy to his godfather. Yes, he actually sold it for gold and a cozy retirement. His godfather, fittingly titled Pope Gregory VI, assumed control. The Church, understandably, freaked out. So now there were two active popes, both somewhat valid. And Benedict, always the opportunist, reconsidered. He returned. In what became his third papal stint, Benedict stormed back into Rome in 1047 and reasserted his authority. His return was less about faith and more about property. He sought dominance once more. At this stage, the Church was so exhausted it almost groaned in Latin. Eventually, Emperor Henry III stepped in and appointed Pope Clement II, and Benedict was definitively removed, excommunicated, exiled, and nearly erased from memory. Well, almost erased, because Benedict stays the only person in history to vend the papacy like a second-hand wagon. And in doing so, he demonstrated that occasionally the most outrageous transgression isn't desire or avarice, but handling the supreme sacred position like a seasonal gig. If you believed medieval popes confined their theatrics to politics and authority, let's now venture into the domain of amorous involvements, envy, and familial discord. The segment of papal chronicles that feels more like a discarded outline from a soap opera, Vatican style. Let's circle back to Benedict IX, who at this juncture in the tale had already seized the papacy more times than most folks redeem coffee loyalty stamps. When he wasn't occupied with being ejected or reinstated, he was tumbling in and out of romance with such tumultuous fervor that even medieval scribes had trouble tracking it. Per one narrative, Benedict chose to sell the papacy to his godfather, not from regret or governmental strain, but because, and this is factual, he wished to wed. Evidently, there was a lady he admired, and he thought resigning as pope would win her over. A sentimental act, indeed. A doctrinally appalling one, also indeed. It failed. The woman rejected his proposal, probably because her endowment didn't encompass eternal public disgrace or uncomfortable gatherings where your spouse was formerly pope. Benedict, embarrassed and still unattached, then attempted to reclaim the papacy, no longer for affection, but from pure ecclesiastical resentment. This wasn't a unique instance of love meddling with Rome. Pope Sergius III, earlier in the 10th century, supposedly maintained a prolonged liaison with Marozia, a potent Roman noblewoman. They might have produced a child together who later became Pope John XII. Yes, that's correct. We had a pope who was the offspring of a pope, a notion that religiously violates more principles than a medieval chef during Lent. The papacy in this period was so controlled by aristocratic lineages marrying, clashing, and plotting for dominance that scholars labeled it the pornocracy, literally, rule of the harlots. Severe, perhaps, but when kin alliances encompass cardinals, mistresses, and relatives all engaging in a game of musical chairs with sacred vows, it's tough to dispute. If you thought papal controversies were restricted to the living, permit me to present one of the oddest chapters in church annals. A moment so bizarre it resembles a Monty Python routine helmed by Dante. In 897, Pope Stephen VI had a grievance with his forerunner, Pope Formosus. The issue? Formosus was deceased and had been for almost a year. But that small fact didn't deter Stephen from initiating what historians term the Cadaver Synod. Also known as the occasion a pope literally tried another pope's corpse. Here's the sequence. Stephen ordered Formosus's decaying remains exhumed from its tomb, attired in complete papal attire, and positioned upright on a throne within the Lateran Basilica. And then, since medieval melodrama knows no limits, Stephen designated a deacon to serve as defense advocate for the body. Yes, someone had to advocate for a decaying skeleton while maintaining composure. The accusations, unlawfully rising to the papacy, breaching canon law and basically being pope when someone else believed he shouldn't. Formosus, understandably silent throughout, was convicted. His papal robes were ripped away. 3 of his blessing fingers were severed, and his remains were cast into the Tiber River like a profoundly unhallowed timber. Astonishingly, not all viewed this as a sensible allocation of church assets. The event sparked broad indignation, even by 9th century measures. Rome, already familiar with religious absurdity, collectively inhaled sharply. Uprisings erupted. Bishops were horrified. The populace, who had likely witnessed plenty of peculiarities, finally set a boundary at prosecuting corpses. Stephen's papacy didn't endure long afterward. He was jailed and strangled in his chamber, probably by someone who felt justice ought to feature fewer cadavers and more rationality. The Cadaver Synod stands as one of the most notorious episodes in papal history, not because it altered teachings, but because it's a cue that unchecked authority, unbridled resentment, and weak self-restraint can yield courtroom spectacles from which no one, not even the dead, can depart unscathed. After the Cadaver Synod, there was a broad agreement in Rome that matters had become somewhat overboard. You can stretch tolerance quite far. Nepotism, bribes, even the sporadic sacred conflict. But exhuming a rotting pope and sawing off his fingers? That was evidently where medieval culture drew the boundary. Pope Stephen VI, right after his post-trial body disposal, anticipated a claim. What he received instead was a papal form of the silent treatment. Bishops murmured. Cardinals averted their gazes. Roman residents grumbled over their drinks. The clergy, who had barely endured decades of dubious conduct, now had to justify why the papacy looked like a spooky marionette performance. Within months, Rome was in outright rebellion, not a courteous document-signing kind of dissent, but more the assault the Lateran palace with torches and pitchforks type. The sentiment was evident. We'll put up with much from a pope, but we'd prefer our deceased to remain interred. Thank you kindly. Stephen was swiftly ousted. Formally, he was detained for political motives, which is medieval lingo for everyone's mortified and you must leave immediately. He was imprisoned, and soon after, strangled by unidentified assailants, though, truthfully, there were likely multiple eager participants. His successor, Pope Romanus, did what most fresh leaders do following a catastrophic predecessor, undid nearly all of it. He invalidated the Cadaver Synod, attempted to retrieve Formosus's remains from the Tiber. They eventually located him and reinterred the unfortunate man with full honors, presumably this time with safeguards. Still, the harm was inflicted. The Synod had exposed just how much papal politics had strayed from spirituality into the territory of spiteful theatrics. Devout Christians, even the more trusting ones, had to wonder, is the individual overseeing our salvation mentally steady enough not to berate corpses? By the early 14th century, the papacy was fully withdrawing from Rome, not for a religious retreat or building overhaul, but because the French monarchy essentially abducted the Pope, courteously, of course. In 1309, Pope Clement V relocated the papal court from tumultuous, riot-prone Rome to the far calmer, wine-rich town of Avignon, comfortably situated in southern France. Thus commenced the era known as the Avignon Papacy, or as Rome might have phrased it, that period our Pope abandoned us for 70 years. Officially, the relocation was for security. Rome, they claimed, was too perilous, which it certainly was. Homicide, factional strife, and typical Renaissance urban turmoil were widespread. But Avignon conveniently fell under strong French sway, and somehow every pope chosen during this time just happened to be French. What an astonishing coincidence. the Avignon court soon gained a notoriety not for devotion, but for opulence. The papal palace resembled Versailles more than the Vatican. Feasts, silks, wall hangings, personal cooks, and whole wine storerooms that could outlast a monastery. One pope reportedly expended more on seasonings than on aid for the needy. You might contend he was flavoring spirits. Diplomatic correspondences and grievances flooded in from across Christendom. Cardinals grumbled about graft. Local Italian nobles seethed. Pilgrims gazed at the vacant panes of St. Peter's Basilica and wondered, "Is anybody there?" But the Avignon popes weren't rushing back. Why head to Rome when Avignon offered superior facilities, fewer crowds, and genuine cheese servings? Nonetheless, fissures began to appear. The church's reputation suffered. Detractors dubbed it the Babylonian captivity of the church, likening the papacy's absence to Israel's exile. Harsh, yes, but when your most sacred office operates from a French vineyard area, it draws attention. Eventually, tension built. In 1377, Pope Gregory XII returned to Rome, but not before almost 7 decades of absence had reshaped the papacy from a Roman entity to a transborder spectacle. It was intended as a secure refuge. Instead, it became a lavish banishment with superb provisions. And just as stability seemed to emerge, the Church opted to amplify the turmoil by selecting 2 popes. If one pope can trigger a scandal and 2 can ignite bewilderment, then 3 popes all asserting legitimacy is what medieval chroniclers officially call a doctrinal disaster. After the Avignon Papacy concluded in 1377 and the papacy returned to Rome, the Church exhaled a shared breath of relief for roughly 5 minutes. Then Pope Gregory XIV died. The Roman crowd insisted on an Italian pope, quite vocally with flames. So the cardinals, many French, hastily chose Urban VI, an Italian. Issue resolved. Not quite. Urban proved to be, shall we say, challenging. He reprimanded the cardinals, declined to negotiate, and charged folks with conspiring against him, which, fairly, they eventually did. The cardinals, regretting their choice almost instantly, proclaimed the selection void, citing crowd coercion and likely indigestion, and picked Clement VII instead. He established operations back in Avignon. Thus started the Western Schism, where 2 popes claimed validity, each banishing the other with fervent zeal and no introspection. It resembled a costly separation, but instead of dividing assets, they divided Christendom. Monarchs had to choose allegiances. France, Scotland, and Spain supported Avignon. England, the Holy Roman Empire, and much of Italy aligned with Rome. Bishops were perplexed. Congregants were mystified, and salvation itself started to seem like a question of location. This dual pope arrangement persisted for decades. But naturally, the Church discovered a way to worsen matters. In 1409, a council in Pisa attempted to fix the problem by dismissing both popes and selecting a third, Alexander V. But neither original pope resigned. So now, for a short and splendid instant in history, the Catholic Church had 3 popes. Each asserted sole legitimacy. Each excommunicated the others, and all 3 declined to share the sacred headgear. Finally, in 1417, the Council of Constance took decisive action. They removed or compelled all 3 claimants to withdraw and chose Pope Martin V, who presumably vowed not to initiate more schisms for at least a week. If you thought the papacy couldn't surpass corpse trials, papal auctions, and holy trios, let me present Rodrigo Borgia, better known as Pope Alexander VI, a man whose tenure was so extravagant that even Renaissance Italy flushed. Elected in 1492, yes, the same year Columbus set sail, Rodrigo was less a spiritual guide and more a governmental top predator. His ascent to the papacy included the standard devotions and fragrances, plus an unprecedented amount of bribes. Cardinals supposedly got mansions, riches, and possibly pedicures for their ballots. It was less a vote and more a religious bargain bonanza. Once enthroned as Pope, Alexander managed the Vatican like a fusion of crime syndicate base and kin estate. And I mean kin. He publicly recognized several offspring, most notably Cesare and Lucrezia Borgia, which for a pope vowed to chastity was a daring step. Rather than concealing his illegitimate children, he advanced them. Cesare received military expeditions. Lucrezia got strategically advantageous unions. Nepotism? The Borgias created the premium edition. Alexander was also an expert in duplicity. He'd assure French kings one thing, then promptly correspond with the Spanish ruler proposing the contrary, complete with his wax imprint and likely a gratis vial of papal vintage. The church coffers were treated like a personal savings, funding battles, celebrations, and upgrades that curiously favored Borgia family assets. The papal court under Alexander was notorious. Sumptuous feasts, costume dances, and whispers of revelries in the apostolic palace grew so common that some peers suspected he mixed holy decrees with event coordination. The phrase Borgia poison wasn't symbolic. Adversaries tended to perish suspiciously post-meal. Despite the uproar, Alexander was remarkably capable. Politically astute, financially shrewd, and well-linked. If the papacy was a venture, he operated it like a chief executive with a blade beneath the table. He fortified the Vatican's framework, steadied its finances by pressuring all, and broadened its reach across Europe. Piety optional. He passed in 1503, probably from malaria or toxin or fate. Accounts differ, but his heritage endures as the definitive prompt that in the Renaissance, even the Pope could be a warlord in vestments with a family emblem, a dash of scandal, and zero remorse. When your dad is the Pope and also the most driven Borgia ever, your youth is unlikely to feature lullabies and fruit gathering. For Lucrezia and Cesare Borgia, existence was a perpetual swirl of pacts, blades, nuptials, and secrets, all beneath the refined canopy of the Vatican. Let's begin with Cesare, the initial church prince turned genuine warfare prince. He was appointed a cardinal at the young age of 18 because nothing signals religious maturity like adolescence. But crimson garments weren't his preference. He favored male and the sporadic elimination. When his sibling Giovanni died under enigmatic conditions, all eyes turned to Cesare, including the popes, who didn't appear excessively distressed. Soon after, Cesare handily stepped down from the cardinal role, which wasn't typically done, and shifted professions from cleric to hired warrior chief. Picture holy figure to assassin in under 30 days. Backed by church funds and supported by his father, Cesare carved through central Italy, seizing towns and dispatching competitors like a papal take on Grand Theft Auto Renaissance version. Now Lucrezia. History has been both harsh and muddled about her. Depending on the account, she was either a savvy political piece or a plotting poisoner with a dramatic touch. The reality is probably midway. She wed 3 times, not for love, but because her dad required coalitions. One marriage was annulled, one spouse mysteriously slain. Cesare again, perhaps. And the third endured long enough for Lucrezia to become Duchess of Ferrara and a genuine art supporter. Rumors circulated. Incest, toxin jewelry, hidden paramours under Vatican hatches. Historians now think much of this was political defamation. Borgia foes couldn't defeat them with weapons, so they resorted to libel. Still, when you're a pope's daughter and your brother is assembling a personal force, it's challenging to remain untainted. Together, Lucrezia and Cesare became the Renaissance's most infamous kin. Intelligent, perilous, and picturesque in murals. They obscured the boundary between monarchy and syndicate. And throughout, Pope Alexander VI observed proudly, like a parent at a school production where everyone gets inadvertently pierced by the second act. By the time Pope Julius II assumed office in 1503, the papacy had already endured every imaginable scandal, from corpse proceedings to favoritist domains. Julius, however, lacked tolerance for nuance or vice. He didn't aim to poison foes. He wanted to smash them with forces. Born Giuliano della Rovere, Julius rose to the papal seat with one hand on his hat and the other clutching a blade. He didn't feign piety. He knew his desires: authority, artwork, and truly striking armor. He was termed the warrior pope, not ironically, but literally. The man directed soldiers into combat clad in full armor. Not figuratively, actually. Julius wasn't merely simulating war. He personally led efforts to recover lost papal territories. He cursed like a hired fighter, bore arms, and once berated defiant cardinals like a training instructor in Latin. When detractors queried if a pope should truly charge into battle, Julius replied with the religious equivalent of, "Hold my chalice." Despite his combative nature, Julius also saw himself as an arts benefactor, and he certainly delivered. He hired Michelangelo to adorn the Sistine Chapel ceiling, a task Michelangelo despised so much he composed irate verses about it while working inverted around the clock. Julius would inspect by ascending the framework and scolding him for tardiness. Artistic motivation, Roman fashion. He also engaged Raphael to embellish his private quarters and Bramante to commence reconstructing St. Peter's Basilica. Essentially, if a Renaissance luminary was available, Julius employed them and likely reprimanded them at least once. His papacy was fierce, costly, and noisy, like a Renaissance blockbuster funded by the Vatican. But ultimately, Julius bequeathed a reformed and enlarged church-state, a revitalized Rome, and some of humanity's most emblematic art. He died in 1513, not in combat, somewhat surprisingly, but probably from natural ailments, which given his existence might have been his most underwhelming choice. If Pope Julius II was the commander who charged into battle with a sword, Pope Leo X was the noble who sauntered into the Vatican in silk footwear humming tunes. Born Giovanni de' Medici, Leo didn't so much inherit the papacy as he elegantly slipped into it, the first pope from the renowned Medici lineage and the religious counterpart of blending high fashion with sacred vows. He assumed office in 1513, famously stating, "Since God has granted us the papacy, let us savor it." Which might not be the most doctrinally robust declaration, but surely a candid one. Savor it he did. Leo transformed the Vatican into Europe's most elite gathering spot. Feasts, stage shows, unusual animals, and ample Renaissance furnishings to insolvent a small duchy. His pet elephant, Hanno, was so cherished that he constructed a bespoke marble abode for it, which reveals much about papal focuses then. Alleviating poverty? Perhaps later. Currently, Hanno requires another fruit assortment. But Leo's excesses, both literal and metaphorical, extended beyond rare creatures. Confronting a vast deficit in the Vatican's finances, courtesy of Julius, Leo sanctioned an aggressive revenue scheme: the extensive vending of indulgences. These were formal church papers that, for the appropriate fee, vowed to shorten purgatory time. Transgress now, settle later. It succeeded splendidly. Folks queued to purchase spiritual bargains like a soul-saving discount event. But not all were impressed. One especially irritable monk in Germany, a particular Martin Luther, observed the entire matter and thought, "No way." Luther's renowned 95 Theses, affixed to a church entrance in 1517, directly contested Leo's indulgence practices, accusing the Pope of vending absolution like a marketplace. Leo's reply was unhurried. He labeled Luther a tipsy German who'd rethink when clear-headed. Spoiler, he didn't. Leo excommunicated Luther in 1521, but by then the Protestant Reformation had started, and the Church's dominance over salvation was eroding through its ornate digits. Leo died that same year, reportedly from pneumonia, though some murmured it was from excessive eel consumption. Appropriate, really, for a pope whose rule was extravagant in every conceivable way. For over a millennium, much of the Western world believed the human body was ruled by 4 enigmatic fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. This concept, known as the humor theory, formed the basis of ancient and medieval medicine. First suggested by Hippocrates in the 5th century BCE, and later elaborated by Galen in the Roman Empire, the theory asserted that health was a fragile equilibrium among these 4 substances. Illness meant one of your humors had gone astray. Each humor connected to a season, temperament, organ, and even personality type. Blood was warm and moist, tied to spring and a cheerful, sociable nature. Yellow bile was hot and dry, linked to summer and ire. Black bile was cold and dry, associated with autumn and melancholy. Phlegm was cold and wet, connected to winter and a lethargic, serene disposition. So if someone felt overly tearful, ancient healers wouldn't suggest counseling. They'd recommend dietary adjustments or perhaps a laxative to expel the surplus black bile. Maybe the most infamous remedy inspired by humor theory was bloodletting. Physicians and barbers would cut a vein or apply leeches to drain excess blood, convinced it would reestablish inner balance. This method grew so prevalent that some patients perished not from disease but from excessive intervention. George Washington's death in 1799 is often partly blamed on vigorous bloodletting rooted in these same notions. Despite its clear shortcomings, humorism wasn't completely absurd. It was an initial effort to forge a methodical comprehension of the body. It recognized that varied symptoms could arise from inner disharmonies rather than otherworldly hexes. It encouraged detailed patient observation: what they consumed, how they rested, the hue of their urine or saliva. In certain respects, it marked the start of clinical logic, though encased in erroneous biology, and it was tenacious. Humor theory persisted into the Renaissance, impacting medicine, psychology, and even art. Remedies varied from plant-based cures and eating plans to inducing vomiting and enemas, all aimed at realigning the humors. If ancient doctors were unsure of your ailment, their initial response was often chillingly straightforward: let the blood flow. Bloodletting became the default remedy for ailments from fevers to headaches, nightmares to heartaches. Grounded in humor theory, it was thought that most diseases stemmed from surplus blood, a humor linked to warmth, vitality, and bodily and spiritual imbalances. The fix? Incise a vein and allow some of that troublesome vital fluid to escape. The practice spanned various civilizations. In ancient Greece, Hippocrates advised it prudently, while Galen elevated it to an artistry, contending that blood should be extracted from particular veins based on the ailment's site. Left temple ache? Open the right arm. Swollen liver? Target the inner thigh. Accuracy in folly, but accuracy all the same. In medieval Europe, matters intensified. healers employed detailed schedules called bleeding charts to pinpoint optimal bleeding times according to lunar phases and zodiac positions. Monks and barbers frequently performed the bleeding, thus the traditional red and white barber pole representing blood and wrappings. Yes, your local barber once moonlighted as a surgeon. Bloodletting didn't always involve slicing a vein. Sometimes leeches were employed. These slippery critters could consume several times their weight in blood and were viewed as a milder, tidier alternative. They were so favored that Europe faced a medical leech scarcity in the 19th century. Folks stockpiled them like treasure. Did it succeed? Occasionally, by chance. Lowering blood volume can reduce pressure, which might have aided in uncommon instances like high temperatures or specific cardiac issues. But more frequently, it debilitated the patient, heightened infection risk, and hastened demise. George Washington famously had almost half his blood drained during his last sickness. He didn't recuperate. Yet, despite its perils, bloodletting continued into the 19th century. Why? Because it seemed active. It demonstrated the healer was intervening, even if that intervention was damaging. And the ceremony of it, the tools, the diagrams, the striking visuals, bolstered the facade of medical mastery. Today, bloodletting is limited to rare ailments like hemochromatosis. But for centuries, it ranked as one of medicine's most enduring fallacies. A stark reminder that even benevolent treatments cloaked in custom and theory can cause more damage than benefit. Before germs were even a faint notion, ancient societies had their own rationale for illness, miasma or foul air. For thousands of years, people thought sickness arose not from bacteria or viruses, but from unseen toxic fumes emanating from decaying material, marshes, unburied bodies, or even unethical conduct. If you detected something rotten, you were likely at risk. This theory wasn't marginal. It was core science from ancient Greece to Victorian London. The word miasma derives from the Greek miasma, signifying pollution or blemish. Per thinkers like Hippocrates, inhaling tainted air upset the humor balance in the body, causing disease. In Rome, impoverished districts were regarded as physically and morally impure, and public health authorities sought to fight illness by enhancing airflow and managing scents. The miasma theory endured through the Middle Ages and Renaissance. When the Black Death ravaged Europe in the 14th century, doctors donned odd-beaked masks stuffed with herbs and spices. Those weren't style choices. They were primitive respirators designed to cleanse the air. Cities ignited incense on streets, constructed huge fires, and moved cemeteries hoping to dispel the lethal vapors. In ancient India and China, versions of miasma theory also thrived. In Sanskrit medical writings, bad wind was frequently cited as a disease origin. In Chinese medicine, qi, vital energy, could be tainted by impure air, resulting in physical discord. Though expressed differently, the fundamental idea was identical. Contaminated air equaled unwell bodies. Ironically, though the miasma theory was scientifically incorrect, it yielded some public health triumphs. Urban cleanup initiatives in 19th century Europe, sewer networks, road sweeping, and clean water systems were propelled by miasma theory. These endeavors sharply cut disease, not by purifying the air, but by eliminating the actual offenders, bacteria in waste-polluted water. The true demise of the miasma model arrived in the mid-19th century with efforts by scientists like John Snow and Louis Pasteur, who demonstrated that cholera and other illnesses were due to microbes, not mist. But by then, miasma had indelibly shaped urban design, building, and medical philosophy. In the ancient world, the divide between remedy and toxin was razor-sharp and often disregarded. Many therapies prescribed with utmost gravity would appall a contemporary physician. Foremost among these was mercury, the shimmering metal that captivated healers across cultures for ages. To the ancients, it wasn't poisonous. It was enchanted. In ancient China, mercury, called cinnabar in its red crystalline state, was valued in Taoist alchemy. It was thought to foster immortality and spiritual awakening. Some emperors swallowed pills of mercury and arsenic to maintain youth. The outcome: torturous death by heavy metal toxicity. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, may have perished from mercury potions meant to render him eternal. The Greeks and Romans weren't blameless either. Mercury served as a purgative, a cleanser, and even a remedy for skin ailments. Later, in the Islamic Golden Age and medieval Europe, it became a preferred treatment for syphilis, applied externally, injected, or vaporized. Patients would salivate uncontrollably, shed teeth, and gradually descend into insanity. But if the illness receded, the cure was deemed successful. And mercury was merely the start. Consider mandrake, a root vaguely human-shaped. Across the Mediterranean, it was regarded as a potent sedative and fertility booster, but also perilously hallucinogenic. Harvesting it was said to be fatal unless performed at night with complex ceremonies, and some tales claimed it shrieked when uprooted. Still, Greek and Roman healers pulverized it into tranquilizers, sometimes mixing it with opium to sedate surgery patients. There was also lead, used in makeup, wine enhancers, and healing ointments. Romans sweetened their wine with a syrup produced by simmering grape juice in lead vessels. Tasty, but gradually poisonous. Prolonged exposure caused everything from barrenness to lunacy, but few linked it. Even crocodile dung was acceptable, employed in Egyptian birth control mixtures. That's right. Insert, cross fingers, and praise the deities. Why did these hazardous remedies endure? Because when medicine relies on symbolism, legend, and experimentation, anything goes. If something had a potent odor, a striking impact, or an odd form, it was apt to be considered mighty. And occasionally, by pure luck, it functioned. The ancient apothecary was a trove of marvels and terrors. And while many of its cures were deadly, they also mirror something profoundly human: the readiness to attempt anything amid suffering, even ingesting poison seeking relief. When you consider ancient Egyptian medicine, one iconic image prevails: the mummy. But while embalming was mainly a rite of faith and demise, it also discloses a surprising amount about how Egyptians comprehended the human body and where they deviated, sometimes wildly, from anything we'd term science today. The Egyptians were fixated on conservation. They believed that for eternal life, the body must stay whole. This prompted one of history's most detailed embalming processes: extracting inner organs, desiccating the body with natron salts, and wrapping it carefully in linen. The brain, removed via the nose with a hooked instrument, then discarded ironically, one of the most intricate organs, was considered worthless. Yet their embalming abilities demanded a working grasp of anatomy. They knew how to identify and remove the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. They grasped the positioning of muscles, bones, and vessels. In many ways, embalmers were ancient Egypt's nearest equivalent to surgeons, practitioners who learned by disassembling the body. That said, their comprehension of function trailed far behind their knowledge of structure. They thought the heart was the hub of cognition, recollection, and feeling, hence why it was preserved in place or separately. The brain? Mere stuffing. They believed ailments stemmed from obstructions in bodily pathways, often due to malevolent spirits or impure food. Remedies encompassed herbal treatments, invocations, and incantations. Medicine and mysticism entwined. Embalming also shaped Egyptian medical practice in another curious manner. Mummified remnants became components. In Greco-Roman eras, powdered mummy, called mumia, was marketed as medicine. People thought ingesting it could remedy anything from aches to internal hemorrhaging. It didn't. It just meant consuming preserved human remains blended with resin and cloth. Despite the mystical context, Egypt also possessed medical documents like the Ebers Papyrus, cataloging hundreds of cures for injuries, digestive problems, and reproductive matters. Some were remarkably effective, involving honey, a natural antibacterial, moldy bread, penicillin forerunner, and castor oil. Others featured crocodile dung, talismans, or deity appeals. In the medieval Islamic world, one individual stood at the intersection of legend and medicine: Avicenna, also known as Ibn Sina. Born in 980 CE in present-day Uzbekistan, Avicenna became a monumental presence in both philosophy and science. His most lasting creation, the Canon of Medicine, was a vast medical compendium that ruled Islamic and European medicine for centuries. Avicenna inherited the heritage of Greek intellectuals like Hippocrates and Galen, but he didn't merely replicate their concepts. He refined, contested, and systematized them into a more unified framework. The canon was organized like a comprehensive manual. Definitions of ailments, anatomy, pharmacology, diagnostics, and therapies. It covered everything from kidney stones to depression to rabies. But even Avicenna, brilliant as he was, remained bound to humor theory. He expanded on the four humors and even linked them to personalities and organs. Yet his brilliance resided in how methodically he implemented these ideas. He stressed observation, testing, and rational deduction, a major advance in medical approach, even if his biology was flawed. One of his prime contributions was in pharmacology. Avicenna documented hundreds of medications, classified their impacts, and demanded they be tested under controlled settings. He cautioned against overprescribing and highlighted the role of nutrition and surroundings in recovery. This comprehensive method, addressing not just signs but way of life, feels remarkably contemporary. His surgical expertise was restricted, but his grasp of infectious diseases was forward-thinking. Avicenna depicted illnesses spreading via water, soil, and air, edging perilously near germ theory. He even advocated isolation during epidemics, centuries before it became routine. In Europe, the Canon of Medicine was rendered into Latin in the 12th century and served as a university manual until the 1600s. It was esteemed not only for its material but for its lucidity. To European healers navigating mysticism and folklore, Avicenna's volume was like medical doctrine. Of course, he wasn't flawless. He still endorsed astrology, temperaments, and Gold's medical use. But in an era where bleeding, chanting, and conjecture were standard, Avicenna provided something invaluable: structure, reason, and a methodical way to glean from patients. In essence, he didn't dispel the myths, but he guided medicine from obscurity onto a route of analytical thought. For that, Ibn Sina secured his spot among medical titans. If Hippocrates was medicine's father, Galen was its enduring sovereign. Born in 129 CE in the Roman Empire, Galen became the ancient world's most influential medical thinker, so influential that his mistakes molded Western medicine well into the Renaissance. Galen was ingenious, yes, but he was also spectacularly erroneous in ways that plagued medical progress for over a millennium. Galen adhered to the four humors, but elevated the theory to dramatic new levels. He maintained that each organ had a chief humor, that ailments arose from humoral disharmonies, and that restoring balance needed exact interventions like bloodletting, purging, or dietary tweaks. His anatomical texts were treated as scripture. But here's the catch. He never dissected a human corpse. Roman regulations prohibited it. So Galen depended on animal dissections, mainly apes and swine. The outcome: a torrent of incorrect presumptions. He thought the liver generated blood, which then moved to the body via unseen openings in the heart. He believed the brain chilled the blood like a cooler, and that the heart didn't pump blood, it merely took it in and dispersed it. These weren't minor errors. They became core principles for 1,400 years. Despite this, Galen wasn't merely a dogmatic adherent. He championed empirical scrutiny, performed trials, and applied logical inference in assessments. He was a prolific author, generating hundreds of works blending medicine, philosophy, and anatomy. His output was so extensive and authoritative that subsequent scholars hesitated to contest him. To do so was nearly sacrilege. In the Islamic realm, Galen's writings were converted to Arabic and later Latin, becoming standard in medieval European academies. But with veneration came inertia. For centuries, medical learners were taught to verify Galen, not interrogate him. Dissecting a human body and spotting discrepancies? The body must be faulty, not Galen. It wasn't until the Renaissance and individuals like Andreas Vesalius that Galen's anatomical mistakes were finally refuted via direct human dissection when blood was found to circulate, not merely ooze. Medicine was at last freed from his hold. Galen's heritage is paradoxical. A brilliant intellect whose commitment to logic and observation motivated generations, yet whose errors postponed vital medical advances for ages. Ultimately, he reminds us that knowledge must always be probed, even from a prodigy with a blade. In the West, ancient medicine leaned heavily on bodily fluids and bloodletting. But in the East, especially ancient China, medicine followed a wholly different path, one based on unseen energy, flowing streams of life force, and precisely positioned needles. Enter acupuncture, a practice over 2,000 years old and still employed today, despite its enigmatic and sometimes misconstrued roots. At acupuncture's core is the notion of qi, pronounced qi, the life force or energy flowing through the body along invisible pathways called meridians. Illness, per ancient Chinese conviction, happens when qi is obstructed, unbalanced, or diminished. The remedy: restore proper flow. And that's where acupuncture enters. By inserting slender needles at specific body points, practitioners seek to redirect and balance qi, clearing the body's inner bottlenecks. The earliest mentions of acupuncture appear in texts like the Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon, composed around the 2nd century BCE. This foundational text described meridians, acupuncture sites, and how various organs aligned with elements like fire, earth, and water. It wasn't grounded in anatomy as we understand it. There were no blood vessels or nerves in these meridians. Instead, it was a framework rooted in equilibrium, harmony, and nature's observation. Despite the mystical phrasing, acupuncture did yield noticeable effects. It could alleviate pain, promote calm, and sometimes enhance recovery, likely from the body's endorphin release and nervous system reactions. In ancient times, these outcomes were seen as proof that Kuai was restored. Acupuncture wasn't solitary. It was part of a broader structure of traditional Chinese medicine, TCM, which included herbal cures, dietary oversight, cupping, and moxibustion, burning herbs near the skin. The objective was always identical: restore inner balance and align the body with nature. Western medicine stayed doubtful for centuries, particularly because acupuncture's anatomical assertions didn't match scientific paradigms. But in the modern age, research has shown that while meridians may not exist physically, acupuncture can affect the nervous system, ease chronic pain, and even assist with nausea or migraines. It's not sorcery, it's biology reinterpreted. For all the strange ceremonies, hazardous materials, and outright mythical theories that formed ancient medicine, not everything was guesswork. In fact, some ancient remedies, born from keen observation, testing, or sheer need, were surprisingly potent. And in some cases, modern science has come full circle to affirm they were onto something. Let's start with honey. Used in ancient Egypt, Greece, and China as a wound covering, honey was valued for its sweetness and antibacterial traits. Today, we know honey has enzymes producing hydrogen peroxide, making it effective against certain bacteria. It also maintains wound moisture and creates a protective layer. Modern medicine now uses medical-grade honey for burns and ulcers, proving not all viscous cures are folklore. Ancient Indian healers, especially those practicing Ayurveda, advocated turmeric for inflammation and digestion. Modern studies confirm that curcumin, turmeric's active component, has anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. It doesn't heal everything as once asserted, but it's not mere spice rack quackery either. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest Egyptian medical texts, included treatments for constipation, parasites, and even depression. Some formulas involved castor oil, garlic, and willow bark, the last containing salicin, a precursor to aspirin. That's right. Long before Bayer marketed tiny white tablets, ancient Egyptians chewed nature's analgesic. In China, herbalists used ma huang, ephedra, for asthma and congestion. Its active ingredient, ephedrine, was later extracted and used in modern decongestants and stimulants until banned in many nations for abuse. Still, it demonstrated that even without molecular insight, ancient healers could pinpoint powerful compounds via trial and error. The Greeks, particularly Hippocrates, emphasized diet and lifestyle as medicine. "Let food be thy medicine," he reputedly said. And while modern nutrition science is far more intricate, the core notion that health starts with intake remains deeply valid. Even practices like quarantine, used in ancient Persia and suggested by Avicenna, showed early recognition of disease spread long before germ theory. Imagine laboring a full month harvesting crops, erecting temples, or transcribing texts, and instead of coins or electronic transfers, you're compensated in barley sacks. Welcome to ancient Mesopotamia, where economics operated not on cash but on grain. This wasn't barter. It was a remarkably structured, centrally managed economic setup with temples and palaces functioning as early bureaucracies, and in many ways, primitive banks. In locales like Uruk and Lagash, salaries were computed based on social rank, occupation, and output. A senior temple official might get hundreds of liters of grain monthly, while a worker received just enough for survival. Alongside barley, pay could include beer, oil, wool, or bread. These weren't arbitrary selections. They were staples with steady value and ongoing need. View them as Mesopotamia's gold standard for everyday life. But how did they track all this grain circulating? Enter the potent clay tablet inscribed with cuneiform. These early ledgers listed laborers' names, duties, allotments, and even tax payments. Scribes, basically the era's accountants, used uniform measures and symbols. One tablet might state, 2 workers, 5 days, 3 liters of barley per day. Multiplied across thousands of workers, you can grasp the coordination scale required. Temples weren't solely worship sites. They were economic powerhouses. They oversaw vast lands, hired thousands, and stockpiled food for redistribution. Workers labored in temple fields, tended temple animals, and mended temple structures, all for rations. And since the temple distributed those rations, it controlled both workforce and sustenance. State and faith were merged in economic strategy. There was even credit and interest. Need extra grain for winter? Borrow from the temple with interest, often repaid in goods. Can't repay? You risked debt bondage or property forfeiture. The earliest usury regulations and debt pardons arose here. Some kings, acknowledging runaway debt's peril, occasionally wiped obligations in grand economic resets, what we'd call a jubilee. If Mesopotamia operated on barley, ancient Egypt ran on the Nile and its grain. The river wasn't merely hydration. It was the civilization's economic foundation. Annually, the Nile's inundation deposited rich silt along its shores, enabling vast farming. And from this dependable cycle came one of history's most centralized, state-dominated economies. Egypt didn't employ coins until the late Pharaonic era. For most of its history, it ran on a redistribution model. Farmers paid harvest portions, usually grain, as tax to the state. That grain was stored in huge state silos, some holding enough to sustain cities. These silos served as economic cushions, especially during famine, drought, or unrest. Instead of private finance, Egypt's economy channeled through the pharaoh and his administration. The vizier supervised economic strategy, with scribes sent kingdom-wide to evaluate yields and gather taxes. Everything was recorded meticulously, from plot sizes to climate. If a farmer missed quota, he might face whipping or penalty. The records were unyielding. Grain wasn't just sustenance, it was money. Workers building temples or pyramids weren't paid in gold but rations. Bread loaves, beer, onions. A laborer's daily pay might include 5 loaves and 2 beer jugs, seen as both nourishment and recompense. Even artisans and priests got in-kind compensation, scaled by status. The state also fixed prices. Surviving lists show goods' relative worth. How many grain sacks for a goat? How many loaves for sandals? This wasn't free enterprise, but a regulated pricing to ensure trade order and social steadiness. Wealth was gauged less in metal, more in land and grain. Nobles with vast holdings amassed huge power, but the pharaoh always held ultimate claim. In scarcity, the state reopened silos as mercy and authority reassertion. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, the Greeks introduced something forever reshaping economics. Coins, real stamped metal currency for daily deals in lively markets. This wasn't mere tech advance, it was mental. It built value trust, backed not by grain or deities, but a collective worth notion stamped into silver and bronze. The earliest Greek coins appeared around the 7th century BCE in Lydia, but mainland Greek city-states like Athens, Corinth, and Aegina developed monetary systems. Athens minted the famed owl tetradrachms from pure silver mined at Laurion in Attica. These coins weren't just tender, they were promotion. The owl, denoting wisdom and Athena, reminded users of the coin's origin and guarantor. Coins enabled swift trade and taxation. Instead of transporting grain or stock, merchants paid dues or troops with coin handfuls. Crucially, coins standardized value, vital in pan-Hellenic networks where diverse economies needed commerce. A recognizable stamped coin became a trust credential. But Greek economics wasn't solely shiny coins and bazaars. Wealth disparity was chronic. In many city-states, including Athens, land concentrated among few, while indebted farmers struggled. That's why reformers like Solon canceled debts and banned debt slavery. Moves not just compassionate, but vital for stability. There were early price control and rationing trials. In war or famine, some polis capped bread costs or limited grain exports. The state intervened when markets grew harsh, and government wasn't alone in strategic economics. Temples were key players. Sites like Delphi or Delos functioned as finance hubs, holding funds, lending, issuing receipts. Faith and economy intertwined, with more marble. Greek philosophy shaped economic ideas too. Plato and Aristotle discussed usury dangers, profit ethics, and ideal self-sufficiency commerce balance. For them, economics wasn't mere arithmetic, it was morality. In Greece, the coin emerged, but so did the debate. How to handle wealth, power, fairness in a world where money moves quicker than grain. As Rome ascended, the ancient economy entered imperial scale. The Roman Republic and Empire managed vast lands from Britain to Egypt. With expansion came huge challenge. Funding the apparatus, keeping legions advancing, aqueducts running, emperors secure. At Rome's economic core was taxation. Unlike prior societies paying in grain or goods, Rome heavily used coinage, especially post-silver denarius standardization. Citizens paid coin taxes, provinces tribute, often in metals or bulk items. Conquered? You paid for defeat. Tax gathering wasn't always orderly. Rome often farmed taxes. Wealthy publicani paid state up front for regional collection rights. Excess was profit. Predictably, this bred abuse and extortion, especially distant provinces with weak oversight. Cicero decried corrupt tax farmers. The empire maintained massive military payroll. Soldiers got coins and land, loyalty incentive. State minted millions annually, sourcing Spanish silver, Dacian gold. But sustaining was costly. Revenue dips led emperors to debase currency, diluting silver to extend supply. Effective short-term, but caused inflation, distrust. Rome's economy wasn't all taxes and war. Vibrant markets in cities traded luxuries. Chinese silk, Indian pepper, Egyptian glass. Trade aided by Roman roads, ports, safe Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum. State grain dole in Rome fed thousands subsidized, keeping poor nourished, quiet. Wealth inequality stark. Elite senators owned vast latifundia worked by slaves. Small farmers debt-crushed, absorbed. Mobility limited, prosperity upward. Rome displayed monetized, centralized economy, but revealed flaws. Inflation, exploitation, taxing gap. Familiar? Some issues timeless. As the Roman Empire advanced into the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, its economy faltered, then fractured. Trade strained, military expenses swelled, confidence in imperial currency crumbled. Late Roman economics cautions what occurs when governments fix financial crises by altering money. The early silver denarius, once commerce bedrock, steadily devalued. Desperately paying troops and officials, emperors debased coinage, mixing silver with cheaper metals like copper, lead. Valuable coin became token. Trust eroded, prices climbed, inflation reality. By Emperor Diocletian's late 3rd century, inflation spiraled. Bread once 1 coin, now 100. In response, Diocletian issued the edict on maximum prices in 301 CE. This vast decree fixed prices on wheat to labor to lion meat, even max wages. Violation. Death. Decisive, but failed spectacularly. Sellers withheld at mandated prices. Black market boomed, enforcement impossible. Edict became irrelevant, monument to command economics failing supply-demand. To steady chaos, Diocletian and Constantine reformed money. Diocletian issued Argentius, Constantine solidus, gold coin enduring centuries stably. But for commoners, especially provinces, stable coin access limited. Most bartered or hoarded silver-rich old coins. Meanwhile, economy grew autarkic, self-sustaining. Large estates produced food, tools, distanced from volatile markets. This shift heralded medieval manorial economy. After Western Rome's fall, Eastern Byzantium preserved Roman systems, balancing control collapse, micromanagement markets. Byzantium's stability heart. Solidus, Constantine's gold coin maintaining weight purity over 700 years. Known as Byzant in West, solidus became era's trusted international currency, accepted Baghdad to Venice to China. In debased currency world, Byzantium's gold pure, reputation invaluable. But economy wasn't laissez-faire. Opposite, state interventionist. Set prices for Constantinople staples. Bread, wine, oil. Inherited Roman annona ensured Egyptian grain shipments fed capital stably, market volatility free. Political necessity. Bread shortage or spikes sparked riots. Constantinople folk outspoken in discontent. Empire had sophisticated bureaucracy. Tax officials, grain inspectors, urban controllers. Farmers paid produce cash taxes. Soldiers, bureaucrats gold, ensuring loyalty liquidity. But economy stratified, wealth in landowning families with tax exemptions. Result? Shrinking tax base, burden on smallholders' peasants. Emperors like Basil the Coup curbed aristocratic perks for treasury. Less disciplined granted lands exemptions freely, long-term destabilizing. Trade thrived, especially luxuries. Silks, spices, icons. State-controlled production sales. Guilds regulated tightly, silk state monopoly. Empire feared losing control meant losing wealth diplomacy. While Mediterranean calculated denarii hoarded solidi, ancient China developed humanity's most sophisticated enduring economic systems. Centered agriculture, rice, millet China innovated. Standardized coinage, bureaucratic taxation, world's first paper money. Early dynasties like Zhou Qin tied land ownership to tax duties. Farmers paid grain labor to state lords. Han unification expanded state control over trade, resources, money. Taxes streamlined. Land, harvest share, labor, public project days, tribute, kind cash. System supported vast bureaucracy. Officials exam chosen, meritocratic ahead time. Currency early. Ban Liang coin, round copper square hole, Qin's unity symbol. Later Tang Song refined, bronze iron coins strung for large buys. Innovation beyond metal. Song dynasty trade boom. Merchants found coins burdensome, invented paper money, jiaozi. Private then state issued. By 11th century, government paper circulated, 1,000 years pre-Europe. State gripped salt iron tea, monopolizing production prices. Trade local international. Silk Road to Persia Rome. Maritime to Africa. Despite innovations, China prone inflation imbalance. Yuan overproduction devalued currency, bred distrust. Still, land taxation, bureaucratic management, currency control gave China envied Western continuity. In ancient India, economics took uniquely spiritual bent. While others funneled wealth through kings' emperors, India's often through temples, not just worship houses, but financial entities, landowners, employers, banks. Meanwhile, urban centers trade routes energized by merchant guilds, some near sovereign. Temples Tamil Nadu Karnataka amassed wealth via gold land livestock donations. King noble might donate village complete with people fields tax rights. Temples reinvested, lent grain, leased land, hired artisans, managed irrigation. Inscriptions show interest loans repaid kind coin. Priestly elite became fiscal overseers, blending right revenue. India's economy entwined religious festivals pilgrimages. Towns Varanasi Madurai drew holy day crowds, boosting local trade. Vendors, performers, farmers, financiers benefited. For pilgrims, spiritual trip doubled economic. Parallel temples, merchant guilds, Srini, organized associations, blacksmiths, weavers, spice traders regulating prices, quality, wages. Some had conduct codes, internal courts. Impressively, guilds lent kings, funded temples, sent caravans, early corporations, self-regulating financing, influential. India maintained robust networks via ports, Lothal, Tamarlipti brooch. Good spices, gemstones, ivory textiles to Persia, Rome, Southeast Asia, Africa. Currencies varied. Punch-marked silver, copper tokens, cowrie shells regions. But economic life, not all splendor. Caste rigidly dictated roles, limiting mobility. Potter's son, potter. Merchant's son, merchant. Flexibility existed practice, but institutional change rare. Across ancient world, from Mesopotamian barley wages to Byzantine price controls, one clear: human economies beyond money. Systems, trust, power, belief, survival. Though varied scale sophistication confronted same issues. Debt crises, inflation, inequality, resource distribution. Debt recurring. Mesopotamia, debt to enslavement. Kings forgave amnesties. Athens, indebted farmers rescued Solon's reforms. Rome, over-indebtedness fueled unrest uprisings. Again, societies confronted truth. Top wealth accumulation crack system. Inequality feature not bug. Wealth, land grain coin, concentrated few. Empires Rome. India small farmers crushed taxes competition elite landowners. Result? Widening divides, instability, decline. Familiar? Inflation universal plague. Rome's 3rd century collapse mirrors modern money printing fears. Byzantines held with solidus. China swung innovation overreach paper money. Show currency trust fragile, lost hard restore. Yet lessen resilience. Ancient economies adaptive. Coinage failed? Barter. Market collapsed? Temples guilds. Central wavered? Local filled? No modern banks, not chaos, creativity. Another, economics always social. Not just markets production, but rituals, festivals, kinship, cosmic order. Temple, vault, farmer, field, king, collector, tide, shared worldview, wealth, movement, control. Ancients didn't solve inequality, invent perfect system, but understood forgotten. Economies, human ecosystems. Flourish, balance maintained. Ignore, even strongest empire falls grain coin by grain coin. Imagine you've journeyed days, perhaps weeks, through ancient Greece's dusty hills and olive groves. You're not here for tourism or typical devotion. You're desperate. Joints ache. Vision fades. Or maybe something inexplicable afflicts you, unexplainable by village healers. So you've arrived at Asclepius's sanctuary at Epidaurus. Not hospital clinic, but divine healing complex in Peloponnese hills where medicine miracles converge. Approaching, first see not grand temple, but orderly structures. Baths, gymnasia, stadium, massive theater. Wonder, really healing place? But cross sacred boundary, normal rules cease. Air scents, burnt offerings, medicinal herbs. Pilgrims murmur prayers. Sacred dogs roam, and everywhere, snakes. Non-venomous, but unsettling. Asclepius's sacred creatures, believed carry healing. Priest therapeutes greets, starts ritual purification. Wash sacred waters, fast. Offer coin fruit clay afflicted body part replica. Then to Abaton, dormitory for miracle. Sleep tonight hoping divine dream. Asclepius visit, touch staff whisper cures send signs. No anesthesia scalpels, just faith ceremony belief dreams divine messages. For ancient Greeks, healing not mere physical, spiritual psychological symbolic. Epidaurus ultimate for cure transformation. Leave unchanged? No. For many, last hope. For others, where medicine met meaning, sickness found beyond science. Before Epidaurus' premier healing, myth, divine behind sanctuary, Asclepius. Understand sanctuary, understand God. Asclepius healed, revered, feared. Legend, Asclepius Apollo's son, music prophecy medicine god, and mortal Coronis. Story unhappy start. Pregnant Coronis unfaithful. Enraged Apollo killed her, but saved unborn from pyre. Child Asclepius, divine delivered, fire fate bathed. From birth destined healing. Apollo entrusted centaur Chiron, taught surgery, herbology, anatomy, dream interpretation, incantations. Asclepius surpassed. So skilled cured any. Some say resurrected dead. Problem. God's dislike balance upset. Death Hades's realm. Humans immortal. Chaos. Zeus cosmic order struck Asclepius thunderbolt. Healer gone. But memory endured. People mourned, honored, deified. Asclepius mortal mythic doctor to God. Worshipped hope not fear. Emblem. Staff single snake. Medicine symbol today. Sanctuaries Greece. Famously Epidaurus, gathered seek blessing. Unlike gods demanding blood gold, Asclepius faith terracotta limb whispered prayer. Greeks found divine power model healing. Compassionate wise personal. Epidaurus connect older deeper divine. At sanctuary heart, ritual unlike modern medicine. Incubation enkoimesis Greek. No scalpels, pills, white coat diagnosis. Patient slept Abaton, sacred dormitory. Goal, dream. Asclepius divine physician house calls asleep. Before Abaton. Purification. Not hygiene, soul cleanse. Fasting, bathing, abstaining behaviors. Ritual sacrifices required. Body spirit worthy, patient lie temple roof, quiet columns, flickering lamps. Some offerings, clay aching limbs organs. Others hope only. Night. Abaton filled strangers hoping divine message. Sacred snakes slithered, holy messengers. Accounts, snakes crawled sick bodies transferring healing. Horrifying now, ancient Greek, Asclepius noticed. Dream crux treatment. Fortunate, vivid symbolic reassuring. Asclepius human radiant. Speak clearly divine performance. Surgery dream, cryptic, garden walk transformation snake coil affected part. Morning, report dream temple priest. Trained dream interpretation not anatomy. Priest guidance. Ritual diet acts honor God. Always work? Hard say. Greeks. Healing emotional symbolic spiritual. Didn't expect miracles every, but believed dreams thin mortal divine veil. Sometimes quiet Abaton. Healing meaning not medicine. Epidaurus not sacred, stunning. Architecture not accidental ornamental, part treatment. Columns pathways soothe soul elevate mind. Not dark monastic, open orderly sunlit harmony dwelt. Center. Asclepius temple, God residence. Doric, tall proud, sculpted friezes healing sacrifice. Massive gold ivory Asclepius statue inside, bearded calm staff holding. Worshippers enter offerings prayers, attract favor before incubation. Next, Tholos, circular, purpose mystery. Ancient describe underground passages acoustics. Perhaps dream ritual, sacred snakes kept initiates secret rites. Added mystery mystical. Then Abaton, sleeping hall. Long columned, simple design, belied power. Lay hope dream, shoulder pilgrims. Humble today, psychological profound. Lying stars, sacred architecture, believing divine close. Enough shift soul if not body, but Epidaurus more sacred core. Baths, gymnasia, stoas, walking contemplation, theater largest, 13,000 seats. Theater healing sanctuary? Mental stimulation, laughter, storytelling, cure part. Greeks understood healing not herbs prayers, involved environment, mood, emotion. Aesthetics, therapeutic. Clear. Epidaurus, not all dreams, divine visions. While enkoimesis central, diverse physical treatments, familiar modern wellness. Ancients didn't separate mystical, practical, combined, holistic. Example, therapeutic baths. Water sacred, purifier body soul. Patients bathe spring-fed pools, often rituals, preparatory. Greeks, washing open divine influence. Preparatory reset self. Dietary regulation. Priests prescribed condition-based. Light foods, diluted wine fasting. Not calories, balance. Hippocratic. Disease imbalance. Food restore harmony. Fasting before Abaton sleep. Potent vivid dreams. Physical activity encouraged. Walk colonnades, exercise, gymnasia, attend theater. Emotional release movement, communal laughter integral. No mental health term, but mind mattered. Better therapy, Greek tragedy, hearty laugh. Snakes, sacred Asclepius, symbolized renewal, wisdom, life cycle. Non-venomous, slithered temple dormitory. Touch, sleep, healing sign. God's listening. Terrifying maybe, ancient sacred reassurance. Minor surgeries, wound care performed. Rudimentary today. Tools, honey, herb salves, basic antiseptic. Combined prayer ritual, holistic truest. Epidaurus welcomed all. Unlike elite temples, beacon everyone. Farmers, merchants, nobles, slaves. Sickness indiscriminate, God healing too. Inclusivity made Epidaurus not worship place. Living archive, suffering hope. Patients from Greek world beyond. Limping blind carried stretchers. Chronic mental infertility, unexplained maladies baffled locals. Regular cures failed? Here? None tried? Anyway, not just sick, families pilgrimage. Brought ill children, accompanied elderly, last relief chants. Sanctuary bustling, human stories mosaic. Each divine reply longing. No people, not archaeology alone, inscriptions left. Marble slabs near Abaton, dozens testimonies carved. Patient studies. 1. Paralyzed arm man dreamed Asclepius massaging, awoke cured. Another. Blind woman dreamed God touching eyes, vision regained morning. Stories dramatic, theatrical. Others humble, short, all gratitude theme. Inscriptions purpose beyond records. Public proof miracles inspire faith, attract pilgrims. Imagine entering frightened sick reading, carved like you healed, walked out. Hope contagious. But not all cured. Every stone miracle, unrecorded disappointments surely. Yet failure, even transformed. Perhaps community ritual beauty place. Simply seen, not lost cause, worthy divine attention. Behind tranquil rituals, marble columns, small army kept sacred healing machinery. Not free-for-all pilgrims hoped magic. Structure, ancient theocratic healthcare, Rituals interpreters snake feeders. Top, Asclepius priests therapeutes, attendant servants God. Not modern priests, caretakers temple patients. Spiritual guides psychologists, ritual technicians, trained ceremonies dream interpretations core. Patient awoke incubation. Priests listened translated divine symbolism actionable. Not all divine whispers. Sanctuary physicians, Hippocratic Galenic. Hybrids trained practical medicine sacred rites. Recommended diets administered salves massages minor surgeries. Healers. Divine invoked, practical not ignored. Dream interpreters. Specialized priests decoding nocturnal messages Asclepius. Dreamt snakes neck god golden blade surgery. Determined meaning. Behavior change, new offering ritual repeat. Interpretations gentle alarming, weight carried. Support vital. Attendants cleaned dormitories managed sacred animals, grounds guided newcomers. Musicians calming melodies ceremonies. Scribes essential carved miracle testimonies, documenting Asclepius divine one healing time. Not functionaries, belief custodians. Preserving hope expectation balance. Epidaurus healing not God alone, human hands sacred service. Thousands pilgrims, structure legitimacy. Not chaos, choreography. Divine dance God's dreams, human helpers. Modernized strange, but Epidaurus iconic building not temple hospital theater. Massive hillside carved, 13,000 seats. Flawless acoustic symmetry praised today. Theater healing sanctuary? Greeks, drama therapy, performance not entertainment, ritual soul cleansing, catharsis, emotions tragedy comedy, grief joy anger laughter, not illness distractions, treatments, play fate suffering help grieving mother release sorrow, comedy break paralyzed fear, isolation, group therapy ancient, theater connected patients mythic worldview sanctuary, plays divine justice human error healing redemption, figures Orestes Electra Asclepius stage, stories not entertainment, mirrors gods heroes pain loss rebirth struggle, more theater social, pilgrims Mediterranean dialects traditions gods, sat side laughed cried together, shared emotional broke barriers, no longer stranger illness, part healing community. Scholars, performances timed Asclepius festivals, after sacrifices rituals dream incubation, attend theater reflect. Final act multi-day therapeutic, involved body spirit emotions. Walk Epidaurus ruins today, hard not feel history wait softly silence. Columns broken statues weathered, sanctuary spirit lingers. Represents modern world remembering, healing prescription, experience. Centuries Asclepius sanctuary thrived premier ancient healing. Other Asclepia cos Pergamon, Epidaurus heart. Romans respected power. Active till Christianity, pagan temples closed repurposed. Sacred snakes vanished, dream halls quiet. Asclepius god to myth. But legacy endures. Staff single serpent, global medicine emblem. Holistic treatment, mind body spirit, echoes modern wellness psychology palliative. Epidaurus anticipated, belief recovery role environment importance human connection healing. Teaches ritual power. Fasting bathing prayers storytelling, structure suffering meaning. Not random narrative part. Many pilgrims transformative. Even today, patients better when seen, heard, guided journey, not symptom clipboard. Epidaurus reminds human need believe, God science dreams data. People seek story sense illness health. Not superstition, survival. So ruins, not admiration ancient architecture. Question: healing sacred again? Hospitals meaning not treatment? Medicine past wisdom? Epidaurus not cure bodies, restored hope. Sometimes greatest miracle all.